Shadow is a character near and dear to my heart, and just like every 90s baby, I was first introduced to Shadow after playing Sonic Adventure 2, and since then, he's became not only my favorite character in the Sonic the Hedgehog series, but one of my favorite video game characters of all time. And since Sega officially dubbed 2024 as the Year of Shadow, I thought I would celebrate the character by going through every Shadow the Hedgehog game and rank them on a tier list, starting with S tier being the best and F tier being the worst. This list is going to be a little different from what I normally do on my channel because, technically speaking, Shadow has only had one main game to his name, and that doesn't make for a very interesting list. For a game to be considered eligible for the tier list, Shadow has to either be the sole protagonist or needs to have his own campaign in the story. We're not counting his various appearances in other party games and spin-offs, since I won't be able to properly compare his appearance in something like Sonic Heroes to him competing in the javelin throw at the Olympics. I would also like to disclose that this list will be based on my own personal opinion on these games, so if there's something in here you disagree with, please let me know in the comments. Last but not least, if you enjoyed the video, please consider leaving a like, as it really does help the channel out with the YouTube algorithm. And if you want to see more videos like this from me, be sure to smash that subscribe button with a chaos blast. And with that out of the way, let's begin this list with the game that started it all, Sonic Adventure 2. When I make these videos, I typically like to rank these games in release order, but when I was writing the script for this one, I was very torn on if I wanted to save this one for last because, surprise, surprise, Sonic Adventure 2 is my favorite. However, since this is the beginning of Shadow's story and the preceding games on this list follow it, I unfortunately have no chance but to pop off early. Sonic Adventure 2 introduced Shadow the Hedgehog, the ultimate life form created by Professor Gerald Robotnik in his research to unlock the secrets of eternal life. After a mysterious accident on the space colony Ark where they're stationed in, Shadow is awakened 50 years later in a government facility by Gerald's grandson, Dr. Eggman, and teams up with him and Rouge the Bat in order to obtain the 7 Chaos Emeralds and take over the world. Little does Eggman know that Shadow has a more sinister plan behind the scenes, wanting to fulfill the promise of revenge for his best friend Maria, who was a casualty in the accident on the Ark 50 years ago. Sonic Adventure 2 is classified as a 3D platformer, and was the 10-year celebration of the series, as well as the last Sonic title to be released on a Sega console, that being the Dreamcast. The game has 2 storylines for good and evil, with a final chapter made available once you beat both campaigns. The 2 main stories have 3 playable characters each, with whom they share a gameplay style with their rival counterparts. You have the speed missions featuring Sonic and Shadow with the objective of reaching the goal ring as fast as possible. You're able to perform spin dashes to gain instant speed and homing attacks to target obstacles and enemies and home in on them. So that's why they call it a homing attack. It's very fast-paced and so engaging to play over and over again to get the best time possible. Tails and Eggman get mech stages where they go through the stage locking onto targets and shooting them with bullets and missiles and eventually getting the ability to hover over obstacles. These levels are personally my least favorite because you're essentially walking forward while spamming the shoot button, and it's just not very interesting for me. However, there's various techs that you can do to make their gameplay faster and more exciting, which is what I find the most engaging about it. But it's unfortunate that these sections seem like a bit of an afterthought compared to the rest. And lastly, Knuckles and Rouge get hunting stages, where you traverse through an area finding the 3 pieces of the Master Emerald, having the ability to glide, climb walls, and dig solid ground to find buried objects. These levels are very well designed, except for match phase, and the random emerald placements make each replay feel unique. I also discovered that for speedrunning this game, you need to memorize every emerald location with the corresponding hint that the teleprompter gives you, and there are about 100 emerald locations for the 9 hunting levels. Yeah, I gained a lot of respect for the SA2 speedrunning community after hearing this. Since this list is about Shadow the Hedgehog, and obviously because I'm an unga bunga need for speed kind of guy, I'm gonna gush about how much I loved playing Shadow in this game. Even though he plays identically to Sonic, there's always something so cool about playing as the evil rival character. And I also love that the first time you play as him is actually in a boss fight where he just woke up from a long-ass nap and whooped the first person he laid eyes on. My personal favorite stage with him is White Jungle, with Radical Highway coming at a close second. It is a bit unfortunate that he gets less stages than Sonic, but I think he makes up for it with his story. And I know I just raved about how addictive the gameplay is, but that's honestly not why this game is my favorite. No. That credit goes to the iconic story that's being told here. I think it's safe to say that Sonic Adventure 2 has one of, if not the best stories ever told in a Sonic game. And a large part of the credit has to be given to Shadow, since he is the main catalyst of the narrative. Watching Shadow go from a faithful servant of Dr. Eggman to fully taking charge to carry out his revenge, while doing so with a calm and collected attitude, is what got me so attached to this character when I was a kid. He walks around with this sense of superiority, and not because he's trying to prove himself, it's just the fact that he was created to be the ultimate life form. And as the story progresses, we're presented with so many questions about why he was created, what his true intentions are, and if his memories driving him on this quest for revenge are even real. And in the end, Shadow comes to realize that Maria never wanted him to seek revenge on the people of Earth, even after what they did to her, but rather she made him promise to help protect them and give them a chance to be happy. And then he joins the heroes just in time to square up against his prototype, the thing that essentially prompted the government to raid the Ark in the first place. And I have to tell you guys that back in the day, this boss was such a bitch to fight. When I was around 8 years old, I started going to church, which was also around the time that I got to the ending of Sonic Adventure 2. It took me a while to get there because I did the Knuckles section without the snorkel upgrade, but that's beside the point. I remember struggling so hard during this fight that I asked my mom one night if it was okay that I prayed to God to give me the strength to defeat the Bile Lizard. And when I went back and tried again, I did it. I beat the boss. Huge shout out to the big guy upstairs for pulling through and helping 8-year-old Redgrave defeat the giant lizard in a video game. And obviously I can't ignore the final boss fight. Simple in design, but when we have the final boss with live and learn blasting in your ears while your animal friends are cheering you on, it's just peak. It's peak, I'm telling you. This right here is what video gaming is all about. And finally, the ending where Shadow gives it his all and uses his remaining power to teleport the Ark back into space, sacrificing himself to save the Earth and finally fulfilling Maria's true promise. It gets me every time. I cried during my recent stream when Shadow died, and it's even worse when I watched the Sonic X adaptation. Sonic Adventure 2 was one of those games that defined my childhood. And I think it's safe to say that Shadow's introduction and his story is why this game is considered to be one of the best. Shadow was so well received in this game that they had to retcon his death so he could appear in more games. And hell, even the logo for the next Sonic movie that introduces Shadow is based directly off this game. I know it's not perfect, and sometimes the jank can drive me a little crazy, but this is the game that cemented my love for the series and is still one of my favorite video games of all time. This is going to be a first for me, but right away, I'm putting Sonic Adventure 2 right at the top of the list. Sonic Heroes was the second game to feature Shadow as a playable character, but unlike the other titles in the series, the player takes control of 3 characters at once to form a team. After he's believed to be dead, Shadow is discovered by Rouge the Bat, unconscious in a stasis pod located in the deepest part of one of Eggman's bases. As she sets him free, E123 Omega attacks the pair, believing Shadow to be a creation of Eggman, and after Rouge tells them both to chill out, Shadow discovers that he can't remember anything aside from his name and brief images of Maria's death. He unwillingly joins forces with Rouge and Omega to form Team Dark and find Eggman for answers. Like I just mentioned, you play as 3 characters within a team that have their own individual abilities to support the group and progress through the levels. You have speed for clearing stages fast and making tornadoes, power for punching robots and breaking objects, and flight for reaching higher platforms and stunning enemies. Each ability is represented in the interface by a unique color and also has an element associated with them, with speed using wind, power using fire, and flight using lightning. These abilities can be used to solve various puzzles necessary to progress through the stages, as well as give you different routes to go through when you're platforming. Each team also has a unique Team Blast skill that has a major power and additional side effect. Team Dark's Team Blast combines Shadow's Chaos Control, Omega's Firepower, and Rouge's Head Massages to destroy all of the surrounding enemies and freeze time temporarily. In Sonic Heroes, Shadow is a part of Team Dark, which is considered the game's hard mode, and requires you to have a better understanding of the game in order to overcome the challenges presented. And yeah, it's only fitting that the evil team has the more challenging stages, while the cute and cuddly creatures of Team Rose get designated to the baby difficulty. Now you guys know that today, I'm a hardcore gamer who has overcome many of the gaming industry's greatest challenges. I beat Vanilla DMC 3, I've gone through all the Souls games, and I shed blood to get through the first level of the impossible game. So I need you to level with me when I say that when I was a wee little lad, this game, and specifically Team Dark, made me its bitch. And even now, I struggled when I went through it again, especially since I went in raw without warming up with Team Sonic. And I knew this campaign was gonna be hard, but Jesus Christ, there were so many moments here that made me go crazy with how challenging they were, especially in the last few levels. Whenever I think of this game, the first thing I remember is the final section of Lost Jungle with Team Dark, where you're swinging from vine to vine while being chased by this piece of shit. I was stuck on this section for what felt like weeks, and I have no idea why I struggled so hard on this section in particular. And in my most recent playthrough, it took me almost 20 minutes to beat Robot Storm, and what? Over a half hour to get through Egg Fortress? Putting all that aside, one of my biggest critiques with the game as a whole is that even though each of the levels have something unique to them, it's the core gameplay that lacks variety. It just felt like I was doing the same thing over and over again without much variation. And because of that, the levels can start to feel long and repetitive, especially in Team Dark's case. This game also has a bit of what I'll call the 2000s jank, a lack of polish that makes the game feel just a little worse than originally intended. The movement can be a little slippery. You might have instances where you have zero inertia with no way to drift, and the game will sometimes just straight up not work as intended. And the last thing I'm going to mention before moving on is that one of the more confusing parts of this story for me was how Shadow is still around after the events of Sonic Adventure 2. I was always under the impression that the Shadow we play as post Sonic Adventure 2 is a clone. But after having numerous conversations with my chat, I discovered that this is actually the same Shadow the whole time. And this unfortunately isn't made very clear, at least here in the American version, and Rouge even has a mistranslation at the end of the campaign that implies that the Shadow we've been playing as is a robot, with Omega saying that if there is a clone of Shadow, that means the original is out there somewhere, which only adds to the confusion, but we'll touch more on that later. In the end, Shadow's campaign in Sonic Heroes was a mixed bag for me. This was the game that introduced what would become the definitive Team Dark, and it's easy to see why this became a staple team in the series going forward. I absolutely loved the chemistry with Shadow, Rouge, and Omega, but I felt like I didn't enjoy actually playing the game as much as I thought I would. However, this is the game that brought Shadow back, and I did appreciate the story reasoning with that decision and how it affects not only Shadow, but the rest of the Sonic cast. So with all that being said, I'm going to put Team Dark's campaign from Sonic Heroes at B tier. Sonic Battle is one of the more unique spin-off games in the franchise, being a fighting game instead of a fast-paced platformer. And this is a game that I was absolutely addicted to as a kid. Even though I had a Game Boy and a DS, the main way that I played was through the Game Boy player on my GameCube, which is also what I used to record and stream my most recent playthrough. The cliff notes for the main story is that a new character named Emerald is introduced, who is a robot that has the ability to copy everyone's moves. Emerald gets stronger throughout the story as he learns more moves and obtains Chaos Emeralds, with Shadow having the last one. Shadow's portion of the story is second to last, and has him conflicting with the other characters about Emerald's true intentions, and whether or not he has a heart and soul just like Shadow, or is just another weapon ready to wage war on the world. In the story mode, you explore the overworld made up of a bunch of different areas, and when you go into battle, you're taken to a three-dimensional area with 2D sprites. Before the battle starts and when you re-enter after being knocked out, you can select from 3 different special attacks. And with Emerald, you can fully customize his moveset since he's copying all of the other fighters' moves. When it comes to Shadow's abilities, I absolutely love his fighting style, where he's using a combination of swipes and kicks in conjunction with teleporting and chaos powers. I've obviously enjoyed playing as Sonic and Shadow the most, so my Emerald was a healthy combination of the two. These battles are what got me hooked on this game, and I spent countless hours going through the battle arenas fighting all different combinations of enemies. I'm not sure if there was ever a competitive scene for this game, but I am telling you right now that if I was around, I'd be dominating the locals. Playing it now, I feel like the movesets were a bit limited, but this was made in 2004 on the GBA, so I'm willing to give it a pass. As a kid, I also really enjoyed the story, and even now, I thought it was really good. But one of the things that I noticed this time around was that there was a lot of padding. It just takes forever to get to the next fight because there's so much useless dialogue, And even when you get to the next fight, there are instances where you have to repeat the same fight multiple times. Don't get me wrong, there's times where the extra dialogue does help flesh out the other characters, but some of it just felt like a waste of time. And as a reminder, right now I'm talking exclusively about the Shadow portion, which only took me about an hour and a half to beat, but still felt longer because of the filler. But what I appreciated most about Shadow's campaign was that he and Emerald shared a connection not only with Gerald Robotnik, but being created as weapons with the intent of destruction, and going into the deeper conversations about having hearts and souls, and Gerald actually putting a soul identical to Maria's in the both of them to ensure that they don't use their powers for evil, was something so unexpected for a game like this. I had such a great time with Shadow's story that when I get the free time, I'll be going back to replay the rest of it. This game is a hidden gem among the Sonic franchise, and I wish it would get brought back in a remaster, or even given a sequel of some kind. I'm gonna put Shadow's campaign from Sonic Battle at A tier. This shot is so iconic. Let's just take a moment to appreciate just how fucking cool and ridiculous this looks. After getting so much popularity amongst the Sonic fandom, it was only natural for Shadow to get his own spin-off title. And I can only imagine how that board meeting went. So it's a Sonic game, but with guns. What? In Shadow the Hedgehog, an alien invasion led by the mysterious Black Tomb prompts Shadow to take action in order to learn more about his past. Since he still has amnesia, Shadow has to navigate through the levels with his pals and this gun he found, and decide for himself whether he's a good hedgehog or an evil hedgehog. Now, this is the game that really put the edgy in this hedgy. While all the prior Sonic games focused on a younger audience, this was made to be more grown up with darker tones and elements that are otherwise considered inappropriate for the series. I have a favorite story relating to this topic that I told while I was streaming, but I'll give you all the cliff notes. This is the game that taught me the word damn. And as a naive 7-year-old child, I started repeating that word because Shadow the Hedgehog taught it to me. And I didn't realize it was a bad word until years later when I said it while I was playing the multiplayer mode with somebody, and he went and snitched on me because I said a bad word. Oh, fuck you, Johnny. And if you need an idea of just how edgy they wanted to make this game, you'll find that right when you boot it up, because selecting an option gives you the sound effect of a gunshot. Jesus Christ. And I mean, look at this. Imagine being 7 years old and seeing Sonic the freaking Hedgehog, your idol, collapsing on the floor while this motherfucker is standing above him with a gun. I'll be real with y'all. I love this game. I really do. But it definitely has its fair share of issues that hold it back quite a bit. Let's get this out of the way. The game has guns, and you can shoot people with said guns. And yes, it's pretty amazing. You also have access to a variety of vehicles to traverse the levels, and even though Shadow can outrun them because of his super speed, you'll need to use them in order to reach areas you normally can't on foot. I love these additions, and it gives this game in particular its own unique identity, while also making Shadow insanely overpowered. The general gameplay style is actually somewhat similar to how the Speed characters played in Sonic Heroes, but differs by removing the tornadoes, bringing back the more traditional spin dash, having an option to lock Shadow so he faces forward when moving, and giving him the ability to punch people. But unfortunately, this game once again suffers from the same 2000s jank that Sonic Heroes had. The homing attack can still be whack, the light ring dash only works when it feels like it, you can fall to your death from triangle jumps if you're not careful, and the final boss fight is so laughably unpolished that it was easily my least favorite part of the playthrough. And I remembered why this was only my second time going through the final story. Shadow also gets access to 2 different chaos powers depending on the mission he's doing. Defeating the bad enemies will fill Shadow's chaos control, which allows him to literally fly through the map. And defeating the good enemies will fill Shadow's chaos blast, which will do a giant AoE explosion that can be used multiple times. And that leads us into the other selling point of this game, the branching paths. And I think it works here with the idea that Shadow is trying to remember his past, and you as the player can determine whether he's going to follow the path of good or evil. But I am really glad that they only did this for one game. The mission you choose to follow in a level will affect the plot and which level you'll play next. The normal missions will typically have you running to the goal ring as normal, while the non-neutral missions will have you killing all the enemies, activating or destroying artifacts, or in the worst case scenario, finding all 5 of Charmy's top secret discs. While I personally enjoy the overall level design, I think that being forced to follow a specific mission holds it back and makes it less enjoyable to go through, especially on repeated playthroughs. And in the most extreme cases, you'll find yourself frustrated during the more annoying missions, as it's going to make traversing the level feel very tedious. And God forbid you miss even a single objective, because then you'll have to go all the way back to the beginning and search through it like a needle in a haystack, in the most confusing layouts ever created for a video game. Yeah, I'm looking at you, Lost Impact. The one thing that I can say about this on the positive side is that it does add a ton of replay value. You'll need to get the game's 10 endings in order to unlock the true ending. So at the very least, you'll be planning out 10 different routes. And if you're a diehard completionist, you'll have 326 different scenarios to go through, which means that if you really want to 100% this game, you'll need to clear Westopolis at least 326 times. This, however, leads us to the last story, which pretty much ignores every ending you get and does its own thing. So from a narrative standpoint, what was the point in going through all these scenarios when there's going to be a definitive ending anyways? And this is especially puzzling because of this game's expert mode, which can only be unlocked by A-ranking every stage in the game. In the expert mode, you go through all 24 levels in the game, and in all but 3, you just have to go through the missions normally and reach the goal ring. I personally haven't gone through this mode yet, but I've heard from other people that this is the best way to play the game. And going back to the definitive ending, I have some problems with it. While I'm fine with the idea of Gerald making a deal with Black Doom in order to create Shadow, I don't like the retcon that he knew that the government was planning to shut down his research and put everyone in prison. And for me, it ruins the impact that his role plays during the events of Sonic Adventure 2. And, speaking of ruining the impact of Sonic Adventure 2, remember when I said earlier that for my entire life, I was always under the impression that the original Shadow sacrificed himself to save the world, and that there was another copy of Shadow, a clone, if you will, that was created by Gerald, and Eggman found him, and that's why Shadow lost his memory? Well, apparently, he's not a clone. It's the same Shadow. During the final boss, all the characters will do that thing where they give you some final words of encouragement, and when Eggman talks to you, he tells you that after everyone thought Shadow died in SA2, he rescued Shadow with one of his robots, and Shadow just simply lost his memory. And I just like my version more. And to add insult to injury, this crucial piece of information can only be heard if you stay in the fight for 9 minutes, and to my knowledge, is never referenced again? This game is definitely a mixed bag for me. I can't say that I didn't have a good time, because I totally did, but playing it again once I took off my nostalgia goggles really showed me that I still have a lot of issues with this game, especially with the story. I think that it's a game that you can still have fun with and laugh at how edgy it can be, but it had the potential to be so much better. It pains me to say this, but I'm gonna have to put Shadow the Hedgehog at C tier. Here we go. Let's cut right to the chase, okay? This game is bad. I know it, you know it, even my dog knows it. Everything that has to be said about Sonic 06 has already been said, so I'm gonna try my best to not repeat the usual dialogue when it comes to discussing this game. And here's something that I'm sure isn't mentioned very often. Many years ago, during my first casual playthrough of Sonic 06, I didn't run into a single bug. Yeah, I obviously experienced the jank, but I was so disappointed that I played Sonic 06, but didn't get to experience Sonic 06. Fortunately though, for the sake of my sanity, I got to skip the Sonic pre-show and jump right into playing as Shadow. And I gotta be honest with y'all, I actually had a pretty good time with it. However, I already know that it's almost exclusively because I was streaming my playthrough, and myself in the chat had so much fun making jokes and just laughing at the game's shortcomings. In Shadow 06, Shadow is tasked by the federal government to rescue Rouge from Dr. Eggman's base. Once he finds Rouge, Shadow learns that she was on a mission to steal the Book of Darkness. Oh, sorry, I meant the Scepter of Darkness. How silly of me. But not as silly as when Rouge drops the scepter and releases Mephiles the Dark, an experiment born with Iblis during the Solaris project. He plans to release the Flames of Disaster and fuse with it once again to form Solaris and destroy time itself. And it's Shadow's job to stop him because the government told him to. Yeah, I think that's right. So starting with the positives, I thought Shadow's story campaign was pretty solid. And I'm not just saying that in comparison to the other two campaigns in the game. And I think it just goes to show how well Shadow works when he's paired with Rouge and Omega. I also think that Mephiles was a really good villain for the story, literally being a shadow of Shadow. There's a reason why people were so excited to see him come back for Shadow Generations, myself included. Shadow gets a bit of an upgraded kit from his last appearance, but his general gameplay is very similar. You can do additional follow-ups after each homing attack, you can once again hit enemies, this time with sweeps and kicks, and he gets access to chaos powers with different properties that can be acquired in the shop. His stages also have frequent access to vehicles including motorcycles, buggies, hovercrafts, and gliders. And yes, these vehicles also have weapons on them. The homing attack is a bit rough, but in general, these upgrades gave me more options for combat, and I gotta say, I really enjoyed that. Now, when it comes to the general gameplay of Sonic 06, you already know. You bet your sweet bippy this game has that 2000s jank, but here, it's dialed up to 11. There is a severe lack of polish that makes it so frustrating to play. I know you already know this, but I can take any of the dozen or so clips that were made during my 4-hour run of this campaign to show you just what I'm talking about. Why does Shadow move faster in a car when he has super speed? Why can't Rouge jump off the wall after she's climbed on top of it? Oh hey, the homing attack didn't work again, so now I'm dead. Why do I need to shoot the sides of the Eggman train in order to blow it up faster when I'm driving behind it? Alrighty, let's try for that Chaos Blast, and it didn't work. This is one of those games that you could still play normally, but you'll just get way more entertainment when you actively try to break the game. I had a much better time literally flying through Wave Ocean as Omega to get to the goal ring than actually going through it as intended, even when it took me way longer to complete the level because I couldn't find the goal ring. However, at the end of the day, dying because of a flaw of the game will always be irritating. Unfortunately, Shadow's campaign isn't free from this burden, and I too had my "Hey streamer, did you save?" moment during Radical Train after dying and failing the mission over and over again because of something beyond my control. I know that everybody paints this game in a bad light, but personally speaking, I had a pretty decent time with Shadow 06. I've always had a soft spot for this campaign, and while I feel like Sonic and Silver's campaigns are more memorable for all the wrong reasons, I think Shadow's story was the best of the three. It's just unfortunate that there's a lot of missed potential here, but that's exactly why I'm also among those looking forward to the Project 06 mod that's looking to fix all the issues that plague this game. And surprisingly, I'm gonna put Shadow's campaign from Sonic 06 at C tier. Sonic Rivals was one of those games that I remember seeing when walking down the aisles of GameStop, and for some reason it was the one Sonic game I was always curious about. I didn't have a PSP growing up, so I unfortunately never got the chance to play Rivals until very recently, and this game is not very good. I obviously only played through Shadow's story for this video, and I'm so glad it was unlocked right from the beginning because I don't think I can stand another run of this game. Sonic Rivals is a 2D racing platformer where you traverse through the stage to get to the goal ring. And yes, you heard me right. Racing. Every stage of the game, and even in every single boss fight, you're either racing with another character or you have a time limit. And this was something that at first I thought was a pretty fun concept, but it got old very quickly, especially because if you lose the race, or they hit the boss 6 times before you do, you have to start over. And it feels especially bad because you don't need to play the game perfectly, but even if you perform decently, you'll still have the chance of losing the race, and performing decently is going to be the most of your worries because the gameplay here sucks. I know this was made for the PSP, so I'm cutting it a little slack, but Shadow controlled so uncomfortably for me, and the movement felt very stiff when transitioning from different actions. And the story here isn't anything special either. From what I gathered, the main villain of the narrative is trying to turn everyone into cards, and his master plan is turning the world into a giant card. I am playing a Sonic game, right? Really? Okay then. The biggest surprise for me was that the main villain in Shadow's story turned out to be Eggman Nega, who I know from Sonic Rush on the DS. It was such a surprise, and I'm glad that this alternate version of Eggman was used more than once, even if he is delegated to just portable hardware. My experience with Rivals was really unfortunate because even after I set my expectations low, I was still disappointed, and I can say that the saving grace of Shadow's campaign for me was that it was only an hour long. I'm gonna put Sonic Rivals at D tier.
Sonic Rivals 2!
This is just the same game. This is literally the same game. Seriously, I played these games back to back and there were barely any differences. The biggest change in the races is that each character now gets their own unique special move when you collect enough rings, but these are just copied and pasted from the ones in the last game. There was also a new structure for some of the boss fights where you have a small space to knock the rings out of your opponent in a 1-to-3 format, but then in others they still reuse the hit the boss 6 times before your opponent format from the last game. And I'll be completely honest with y'all, I couldn't with this game. I just couldn't. I checked out about a half hour in and I was better for it. I'm not exaggerating when I say that I lost every race at least once. And I know this might sound like a skill issue, but I can assure you that for a majority of the time, I was at least playing somewhat competently, if not decently. And it got to the point where even if I made only a handful of small mistakes, I would still lose to the other character. And because you have to start the race over, I would have effectively doubled my playtime with this game, and I just didn't want to do that. And I figured that since this game played pretty much identically to the first game, I would just save the time and clock out early. I didn't get too far into the story, but from what I've gathered, Eggman Nega is back for some reason, and Shadow has to team up with the regular Eggman, who is controlling Metal Sonic. Also for some reason. I thought it was cool that they added voice lines for the story dialogue, but that's really the only improvement that I can speak on. I'm gonna put Sonic Rivals 2 at D tier, and I truly don't think that it can get any worse from here. God damn it! Shadow has been a playable character in all of the Riders games, but of course, this is the one where he gets his own story. I still have a Kinect, so I felt obligated to buy a copy of Sonic Free Riders to play it for this video, and I really wish I didn't because now I have to admit to all of you that I spent money on this game. But I'm sure I made one of the hundreds of eBay users trying to get rid of this thing very happy. In Sonic Free Riders, Shadow enters the World Grand Prix with Rouge the Bat and Discount Omega as Team Dark. While Rouge was only interested in the large cash prize and treasure that was given to the winners, Shadow's only interest was testing out his racing skills. Because the ultimate life form had nothing better to do. This is just another story that's here to waste your time and make Shadow look like a dick in the process. I know he's supposed to be the designated edgelord of the franchise, but he acts so cold and cruel here towards the other racers, it's completely out of character for him. And now we need to discuss the reason why this game is so infamously bad. The controls. Since your body is the controller, you have to mimic the action that you want to perform in the races. You move by leaning your body left and right, you hold your hand out for rings and other objects, you can kick the ground to get a boost of speed, and you jump by basically jumping in place. Now in concept, this actually sounds really fun, and even my fiance was interested in trying it out when she saw me jumping around like an idiot in the living room. The problem is that this game does not function properly at all. I can't exaggerate when I said that my motion inputs barely registered during the races. And for a majority of the time, I had to perform an action early to make sure it actually worked. And I was trying really hard to get this to work consistently. I really did. I tried subtle movements, exaggerated movements, I changed my position, I added more lights, everything. And I just could not find a way to get it to work properly. It got so bad to the point where I would just let my character crash into walls so they would get redirected and effectively turn for me. This game is also so physically demanding that it not only left me winded after completing just a few races, but my back started hurting from all the exaggerated leaning and jumping. And I say this as someone who's in pretty good shape. I don't think I can exaggerate when I say that this was one of, if not the worst video game I have ever played. And I think the worst part for me was that when I started the game for the first time, I discovered that Team Dark's campaign had to be unlocked. So I was forced to go through not one, not two, but 3 campaigns of this broken mess. Sonic Free Riders goes right where it belongs. on F tier. I need you to do me a favor. I want you to pause the video real quick and take a peek at the current timestamp for the video. And now I need you to believe me when I say that by the time you have watched up to this point in the video, you'll have already beaten Shadow's campaign in Sonic Forces. Twice! This is the first game where Shadow transitions to the boost formula, where Shadow surrounds himself in an energy field and propels himself forward at top speed to break barriers and defeat enemies, and draw in rings depending on the game. As you're boosting, you can also use the bumpers to shift left or right to avoid or hit obstacles. The boost can be used as long as there's energy in the boost gauge, and it can be recharged through various means depending on the game. Even though I personally prefer the style of the older games, I do enjoy playing the boost levels as well, and considering that this formula has been used for over 15 years, it's safe to say it's not going anywhere anytime soon. Shadow's episode takes place before the events of the main campaign, and consists of only 3 missions and 1 unique story cutscene, with the rest of the dialogue being given through codec calls. Sonic Team decided to make this in order to appeal to fans of the older games, and as a fan of said older games, I mean, it was alright. I thought it was cool that the levels had remixes of Shadow's older stages, and I especially appreciated the White Jungle remix for Mystic Jungle, since that is my favorite Shadow stage. And I think I'm not alone in saying that the best part about this prologue episode was seeing Infinite's origin. And not necessarily because it was deep or interesting, but because of how hilarious it is. Shadow beats up Infinite so badly that he decides to be evil and destroy the world. Shadow tells Infinite to never show his face again, and he took that personally. And that's really all I have to say about episode Shadow. It's just way too short, and if I had to purchase Sonic Forces in order to play it, I would have just skipped this one. Fortunately though, I got Sonic Forces when it was playable on PlayStation Plus, and the Shadow campaign was free DLC, which I really appreciated. I'm gonna put episode Shadow at the very bottom of C tier. I enjoyed it leagues more than everything below this list, but I can't justify putting it any higher based on the length. But now, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, it is time for us to end this video. Sonic X Shadow Generations is a remaster of Sonic Generations from 2011, but includes a whole new campaign. Much like how the original title was a celebration of Sonic the Hedgehog, this updated version gives us the same treatment for Shadow. The game's plot happens at the same time as Sonic Generations, and centers around Shadow stopping Black Doom from regaining his strength and conquering the world. And don't ask me why Black Doom is back, because the only real explanation we get is, somehow, Black Doom returned. Shortly after their encounter, the Time Eater drags them into the white space, and this is where the Generations part begins. Sonic Team wanted to make a game to coincide with the release of the Sonic film that introduces Shadow, and while they could have simply thrown this together on a Tuesday like with Sonic Forces and called it a day, it's clear that they learned from their past mistakes and really put the effort into making this a great game for the Edgy the Hedgy fans. And it paid off. And leading up to the release, they went so hard with the marketing of this game for absolutely no reason, commissioning artists and YouTubers to make various advertisements and promotional videos, and even making a 3-episode prologue series that absolutely slaps. I'm not going to go in depth on it because it's obviously not a video game, but it's a short and sweet must-watch for Shadow fans. Dark Beginnings gets an A. Right out of the gate, I have to talk about how amazing these levels are. Almost every stage has a 3D and a 2D stage, just like in Sonic Generations, but unlike the Blue Blur, the 2D stages are actually really good, and I enjoyed the stages so much that I even had fun going through the mandatory stage challenges. What makes these levels stand out to me is that there isn't one set designated way to play the stage. There are plenty of options to choose the path you want to go on, and there are so many opportunities for skips and tricks that it's actually insane. There will also be occasions where the Doom's Eye comes in and changes the stage in this Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness style. I thought it was really funny how every time he did this, he would just take us to Radical Highway, and I would love for someone on the Sonic team to explain this to me because there isn't a single stage from Shadow's own game here, and even though Black Doom was from that game, he takes us to Radical Highway instead of Westopolis. Black Doom comes in and he's all like, "Oh hey Shadow, are you having fun with Sunset Heights? Boom! Domain expansion! Here's Radical Highway from the hit game Sonic Adventure 2 on the Sega Dreamcast. When you're not in the stages, you're navigating through the white space, which takes a 3D hub world approach this time around. It obviously takes a lot of inspiration from Sonic Frontiers, and even though I appreciate the open world setting of Frontiers, this is my ideal setting for the overworld, and I would love to see more of this going forward. It's so much fun to run around, find collectibles, discover secrets, and get some good practice with your new abilities before taking it to the stages. And yes, Shadow has a lot of new abilities in this game. The first is finally having the ability to use Chaos Control to freeze time, and it is such a cool concept that is so fun to use. This ability freezes the stage and the timer, lets you perform a Chaos Dash, a move which lets you travel across a trail of green energy, and gives you access to new routes and shortcuts like running on missiles, or using homing attacks on fallen debris or cannonballs. The other new addition to Shadow's arsenal are the Doom abilities. Doom Spears are an upgraded Chaos Spear that lets you hit up to 5 targets at once. Doom Blast lets you beat the snot out of a guy and send him flying to open up new areas. Doom Surf allows you to traverse on water. Doom Wing lets Shadow break the game by just flying through the stage. And Doom Morph transforms Shadow into a squid. These Doom powers are a smart way of giving Shadow the various weapons from his other appearances without having to use actual guns and vehicles, because I don't think those would really fit the vibe of Generations. And these Doom powers are the one thing that I'm still a little mixed on. I love their inclusion, and it makes these levels feel unlike any other Sonic game I've ever played. But some of the abilities feel a little too gimmicky and aren't really explained well, more specifically the squid and wings. The squid feels clunky because of how niche it is, and for a while I found myself struggling to figure out how to use it properly. It definitely has a learning curve to it, and I had to replay Chaos Island a few times in my initial run to get a good understanding of how to use it. And I came to the realization that the Doom Wings are basically just a super form because you get infinite boost while you're on the ground when you activate it, and like I mentioned earlier, you can break the game by just flying through the stages. You have the option to turn the wings on and off when you select a mission, but going back through all the stages, it felt like only half of them were designed with the Doom Wings in mind. And that's the other thing I'm a bit torn on. While I loved all the stages, they're also specifically designed with getting a new Doom ability. So when you go back through the stages again, you're not going to be utilizing any of the new powers you would have acquired later in the game. I feel like we could have benefited from having one more stage where you have to use each of your Doom powers and alternate between them, because the only time you do this is in the final boss, and at that point, I already forgot how to use the Doom Morph because of how weird it is. I think with more time and practice, this would become a non-issue, but that's the one thing that soured my experience a bit. Let's move on to the boss fights. And y'all, I think I had more fun with the bosses here than I did with Sonic Frontiers. And that's saying something. Each boss revives a classic Shadow villain and incorporates the corresponding Doom abilities really well. I also love that even in the boss levels, you can experiment with different strategies and have opportunities to trigger special events with Chaos Control that do extra damage. My personal favorites were the Bio Lizard, where you start the fight as you would in the hit game Sonic Adventure 2 on the Sega Dreamcast, but then it morphs into something completely different that fits Generations. And Metal Overlord, where you take the fight to the high seas with your Doom Surf and have plenty of opportunities to style on this imposter, with the remix of What I'm Made Of blasting in your ears. And oh my god, I haven't even talked about the soundtrack yet. When the title screen booted up and I was met with this badass remix of Throw It All Away, I audibly said out loud, oh yeah, this game gonna be good. There's so many amazing remixes of Shadow's greatest hits, and you can also unlock more songs in the white space to use in the levels too. And after you beat the campaign, you actually have the ability to toggle the game's hard mode, named the Doom Zone, making the boss fights and the white space challenges more difficult. And this is a nice addition for those such as myself who like the extra challenge. And finally, let's talk about this campaign. A lot of people have been saying that this game has some of the best writing the series has seen in a while, and I'm inclined to agree. As Shadow acquires more Doom powers, we start to see how unhinged he's becoming. And when it looks like he's about to cross that line and get corrupted by his new powers, that's when he gets the support of his friends, and more specifically, his best friend, to remind him of who he really is in his heart. And just like in his first appearance, Shadow has to let go of his anger, and he promises to continue fighting and give everyone a chance to be happy, fulfilling Maria's final wish once again. And I couldn't help but feel the man tears for him as Shadow skated away to help Sonic, shedding a tear of his own. Shadow Generations is a love letter to the character, and even though I wish the campaign was longer, I still had an absolute blast with it. Shadow's story clocked in for me at about 4 hours, but I likely could have done it in 3 if I wasn't being a perfectionist. However, there is a lot to do in the hub world, and since I've beat it, I've caught myself booting the game back up to find more collectibles and get better times on the levels. I can't tell you guys the last time I've been this excited for a new game in the series, and while I did have my minor nitpicks with some of the Doom powers at first, I'm so thrilled to say that this exceeded my already high expectations. And for the final game on this list, I'm gonna put Shadow Generations at S tier. And that, ladies and gentlemen, concludes the tier list. Let me know what you think of my list and where you rank each of the games down in the comments. I'm looking forward to continue celebrating the fearless year of Shadow with his appearance in the Sonic 3 film, as well as the extra stage and costume for him in Shadow Generations, both of which are coming out towards the end of the year. If you enjoyed the video, please consider leaving a like, and if you want to see more videos like this from me, be sure to hit that subscribe button. I'd also like to take this time to thank our YouTube members who go above and beyond to support the channel. And if you'd like to do the same and get access to special perks, click the join button to learn more. And finally, if you want to see some of the other videos I've made on this channel, I'll leave some links over on this side of the screen over here for you to check out. Thank you all again so much for watching. I hope you're as excited for more Shadow the Hedgehog content as I am, and I will see you guys next time.